Hi guys, today I'm going to talk about some strategies that might help you when you go about immersing in your target language. Today's video is the first in a 4-part series, and today we're going to talk about listening to or watching your target language in particular. In the next 3 parts, we'll first talk about the psychological stressors involved in immersing, then we'll talk about reading, and lastly we'll talk about flashcard study and card creation with an SRS. So if you're interested in that type of content, please know that it is coming soon. Today I will also be introducing the concept of levels of attention. In reality, levels of attention are much more fluid, and there's a wide array of different levels of attention you can apply when immersing. But to keep things simple, I'm going to introduce the concept using only 3 levels. A high level of attention, a medium level of attention, and a low level of attention. And I will show you how I personally would engage a little bit differently with my immersion content based on my current level of attention. But know that these are only to serve as examples and introduce the concept. And know that your particular way of engaging with native content at different levels of attention may slightly differ to my own. At the end of the day, and as I've mentioned before, and keep it in mind while you watch this video, the most important thing is to find a method of engaging with native content that is sustainable in your own life. Today's video is divided into 2 sections. The 2 sections deal with what I would do differently depending on whether I had access to subtitles or not. Because how you engage with native materials when you have access to target language subtitles is quite a bit different than how you would if you didn't. So in the first section, I'm going to talk about watching or listening to media when you have access to a written representation of what's being said. Whether that be because you're watching a show with target language subtitles or because you're listening to an ebook which you have the written version of. In the second section, we're going to talk about some strategies you might take when you don't have access to a written representation of the media you're listening to or watching. In part 2 of the series coming next week, I plan to touch on a lot of the psychological stressors that a learner can face when immersing with native content. The feelings of doubt, the feelings of lack of progress, the feelings that you're doing something wrong, the feelings that you're not improving as fast as others, or even the feelings of boredom. So make sure you're subscribed if you've been having similar issues and want to hear about some of the strategies I've used to help me stay engaged. Handling these stressors appropriately is probably the biggest factor in deciding whether you will ultimately succeed in your language learning pursuit. So if you're having trouble, I hope you'll tune in for part 2 next week. Now, before I begin, I just want to say that a lot of learners who aren't studying a more popular language like English, Chinese, or Japanese, for example, or are studying a language like Arabic in which it's extremely difficult to find subtitles that accurately portray the spoken language, that you need not be overly concerned. I would argue that having a written representation of the content you're consuming is certainly better than not having one. But in fact, the vast majority of the listening content I consume did not have subtitles or a written representation. For Japanese, only about 5 to 10% of the content I consumed had a written representation, and for Portuguese, it was probably only about 5%. So while I think a written representation is great, it is important to recognize that not only are they not necessary to acquire a language, but if one over-relies on them, I have a hunch that they might even be somewhat counterproductive when it comes to developing one's raw listening ability. Later in this video, I'll be talking about some strategies that really helped me when I didn't have a written representation. So if you're in the same boat, please stay tuned. And in the near future, I'll be making a video about what I feel is a good breakdown between reading, listening, and studying flashcards in an SRS like Anki, and how I plan to organize my own studies when I start to learn a new language soon. I will also be releasing a guideline with accompanying videos about what I feel is a great strategy to go about pursuing immersion learning in general, and how to adjust one's studies to their individual circumstances. So make sure you subscribe if you're interested in that type of content. Before I show you exactly how I would go about immersing, I want to make one important distinction. In this video, we're talking about listening, namely active listening, which is sitting down and giving your full undivided attention to what you're listening to or watching. If you do any form of passive listening while doing other activities, then of course that's great too. But ultimately, active listening is the name of the game when it comes to acquiring listening ability. In today's video, we're also not talking about the activity of having subtitles constantly on and reading along while you watch a video. I would classify reading along with subtitles or a book while listening to an ebook to be hybrid activities that overall would be closer to reading. And I plan to cover those in part 3 when I talk about reading in particular. So what we're talking about today is listening or watching a show when we have access to a written representation that can be referenced as needed. In a moment, I'll show you some examples of my own immersion session so you can see how I carry it out. We'll be watching a program in German. I basically don't know German at all yet, and my understanding is very, very low. I studied German for 2 or 3 months as a leisure activity for 30 minutes to at the very most an hour a day. But that was already 4 years ago, and I've pretty much forgotten it all, so I'm basically a pure beginner right here. So considering that I'm a pure beginner, it would realistically be fine for me to start watching with English subtitles, which would allow me to start building the habit of watching German shows, while at the same time diligently studying the structure of the language and its base vocabulary through flashcards and other study. When I release the guideline, all these strategies will be clearly laid out there. But today, I particularly want to demonstrate how I would engage with the language when my understanding is still extremely low. I'm going to be using the Immerse with Migaku browser extension, which I am personally developing along with other collaborators on the Migaku Discord server. At the time of this video's release, a beta version of it is accessible to Patreon supporters. However, I plan to release it publicly once it's been better tested and greatly improved. It may have already been released by the time you're watching this video, so make sure you check the links in the description for more information. There are other similar tools with some similar functionality. Two that come to mind are Language Learning with Netflix and Subtitles. So if you don't have access to the Immerse with Migaku extension yet, you can check those other tools out. Anyways, the reason I'm using a tool like the Immerse with Migaku browser extension is because it makes the process of practicing your listening a lot easier, as I plan to show you shortly. Before we begin immersing, I just want to tell you about the main principle I like to follow when listening. The main principle being trying to stay with the stream of conversation. It can be tempting to think about what was just said, and in doing so, not listen to what is currently being said. This strategy of thinking very deeply about what was just said has its place and can work under certain circumstances, such as when using the Immerse with Migaku browser extension's recall mode, which I will introduce you to in just a moment. However, I do personally feel that when you get around an intermediate level and are understanding large swaths of the language, that the majority of your listening should be free-flowing and at real time. And when listening to free-flowing conversation, I believe you should try to stay with what is currently being said. Because I believe you'll lose far more than you'll gain if you constantly have the habit of thinking about what was just said instead of focusing on what's being said now. The main objective is to learn to keep up with what's being said as it's being said. So the more you practice that, the better you'll get at it. A tool like the Immerse with Migaku browser extension's recall mode is probably really helpful up to something like a low to mid-intermediate level. But I personally would be very wary of making that the mainstay of my own listening immersion until we have some data that perhaps suggests otherwise. As I said, I currently don't have much or even any real German ability, so my goals when immersing should be really rather modest. I'm basically just trying to build the habit of engaging with the content in any way at this point. The goal being to be happy about anything I do understand and curious enough to look up some of the words that jump out at me. So let's go ahead and take a look at how I would engage with German at a high level of attention. The first thing I'm going to do is make sure to set the extension to recall mode. Recall mode will hide a subtitle while its audio is playing. Once that subtitle's audio is finished playing, the video will pause and show the subtitle. You may notice that the video will jump back slightly after it pauses. This happens in order to ensure that the next subtitle's audio is played from the beginning. Anyways, the idea with recall mode is that after you've listened to the subtitle, you can check it over by reading it, and check if you've understood it correctly. Now this of course is also a type of hybrid activity between reading and listening. But this hybrid listening method is much closer to raw listening than to raw reading, because you will be listening to the audio content before you are given any hints as to what is being said. Now, it's important to note that I would only use recall mode when I am immersing at a high level of attention. Depending on how I feel a particular day, I may not even immerse at a high level of attention for that day, however. So remember to adjust what you do daily based on how you're feeling that day. So anyways, what I'm basically doing when I do this is just listening to each line and running my eyes through the subtitle text after it is shown. If a word has jumped out at me, I will actively look it up when immersing at a high level of attention, as we should try to be the most inquisitive at this time. You will also notice that I have the Migaku dictionary on always on top mode. This is because the main thing I am focused on right now is not really the visuals of the show. So I don't mind if part of the screen is hidden personally, but this is mostly personal preference. I can at any time press the down button to go to the beginning of the current subtitle and listen to it again. I simply watch the show and actively look up words that I feel sounded interesting. Of course, I can make an audio card with a screenshot at any time that I want to by simply pressing the Anki button. Today I'm not going to do that, so be sure to check out the introduction video to the extension if you want to know more about the instant card creation functionality. What's really important to notice is my carefree attitude about whether I actually understand something or not, but that I am still highly focused on trying to understand. This attitude, I admit, takes time to build, and this type of attitude is likely much easier for me or those who've used immersion learning to achieve fluency before to have, as we trust the process and that it will eventually lead us to fluency and our goals. A final note before we go off script and immerse together a bit. Recall mode is actually something very new, and is not at all required when attempting to listen at a high level of attention. The reason I am personally recommending it and why I choose to use it in my own studies is that I find the very act of needing to unpause the video after each subtitle line is played has greatly helped me to keep my focus during immersion. However, this is likely just to be my own personal preference, so I encourage you to experiment and find something that works for you. So let's go off script now and watch me immerse with a high level of focus for a moment. Okay guys, so let's just watch together just a little bit. We can't watch too much because obviously Netflix would probably claim the video or something, so okay, let's just start here. I just want to look this word up really quick because I know it must mean football, of course. Then I can listen to it once here. Okay, that's what, so that I can understand.
Ihr fragt euch jetzt sicher, warum ich hier die Elite versammelt habe, ne?
Also, okay.
Da hinten sitzen die beiden Kollegen Petrovic und Wachtmeister, die sind von der Schupo.
Oh, Schupo. What does that mean? Let's look that up. What does Schupo mean? Oh, police. Okay, okay. Oh, there's a picture. Okay, cool. Schupo stuck out. Matsam stuck out too. What does this mean? Let's look it up. Oh, I don't know what it means. Something to do with this.
Sie haben gestern Nacht die Leiche von Orkan Erdem gefunden. Das hier?
Das hier? Here is here, pretty sure. I remember studying this before. Yeah, okay, cool.
Ist sein Hund Zeki.
Okay, it's sein Hund Zeki. Hund must mean like dog, I would guess, right? Dog, yep, okay. I didn't even know that, but it sounds like dog, hound or something.
Das liegt am umsichtigen Handeln der Kollegen Petrovic und Wachtmeister. Und das soll auch so bleiben.
Das soll auch so bleiben. Bleiben is like speak or something, right? Or no, stay. Oh yeah. Damn, okay.
Geheimhaltung bis zur offiziellen PK.
Listen to that again.
Absolute Geheimhaltung bis zur offiziellen PK. Wir müssen versuchen, so viel bevor uns der öffentliche Zirkus auf die Füße tritt. Dieser Fall hat absolute Priorität. Ihr wisst, was das heißt. Ich habe von Seiler die Zusage, dass wir die ganze Manpower bekommen, die wir benötigen. Das heißt für euch. Okay. Orkan Erdem wurde um 23:50 Uhr von einem Herrn Stammfeld entdeckt.
I mean, there's not much to be said here, so pretty much all I'm doing is just listening as intently as possible. Of course, I can't pick up all the sounds. I can't parse all the sounds yet. So basically, all I'm doing is trying to listen as much as possible, pick out words that kind of stuck out, look those up, and just keep myself motivated by looking up some words that I kind of think I know. So I look them up and see if I'm actually picking them out correctly. A lot of the times I'm not going to be able to pick them out correctly here at the beginning, but the whole key is just to stay just motivated and try to follow along with what is, or trying to parse what is currently being said as you go. So you can see that when I was immersing, I repeated some words to myself. I did that because personally, that's a lot of fun for me to do. I really like the sound of German, so I'm just trying to have some fun with it while I immerse. It's important to understand that when one is immersing at a high level of attention, that they should try to be very mindful of where their point of focus is. Even when you're intending to be immersing at a high level of attention, it is inevitable that at times you'll begin to be distracted. When you notice that you've become distracted, it's important to immediately refocus on the task at hand. This is actually a skill that one can build, and if you have had trouble focusing during immersion before and follow some of the advice in this video, I'm sure that you will soon notice marked improvements in your ability to focus on your immersion content. But anyways, when you're immersing at a high level of attention and you begin to notice that it's becoming more and more difficult to bring your focus back to your immersion, then that's probably a good time to allow yourself to go ahead and lower your level of attention. I often find myself lowering my level of attention directly from a high level to a low level. That's because a high level of attention is by far the most taxing. It requires you to attempt a high level of control over your point of focus, which is very tiring. But usually, after resting a bit at a low level of attention, I go ahead and scale it back up to a medium level of attention, which we're going to talk about now. Okay, so what is it that I do differently at a medium level of attention? Well, the first thing I do is go ahead and turn off recall mode, because the last thing I want to do when I'm already a bit tired is have to unpause after every subtitle line. So personally, I would put it back on default subtitle mode when immersing at a medium level of attention, which we'll see in a bit. When you have the default subtitle mode enabled, you can press the W key to show or hide the subtitles at any time. I will use that technique to show the subtitles when I really want to see what has been said or when I want to look up a word. But mostly, I won't show the subtitles at all. I'll just be focusing on listening and trying to keep up and parse the sounds that are currently being said. If your level of understanding of your target language is already pretty high, then there will be a lot more potential words that you could look up to understand more of what's being said. However, I would advise you to be really cautious about falling into the trap of looking up too many words, particularly when you're intending to be immersing at a medium level of attention. In contrast, I personally feel it's fine to look up a lot of words when you're at a high level of attention, but be wary if you find yourself getting lookup fatigue, because then it's probably better to go ahead and scale it back. But in general, I really recommend looking up a lot less words when doing listening practice than when doing reading practice, because it can really break up your listening immersion. I personally used to focus a lot more on looking up words when I was reading, for example. As I've said many times by now, the name of the game is not burning out, guys. There's no need to ask too much of yourself all at once. The language learning game is a long one. Always keep that in mind. And there's definitely no need to try to be on your absolute A game all the time. It's very unlikely that you'd be able to, even if you tried anyways. And for the vast majority of us, the very act of trying to do so is actually the road to failure, not to success. As far as where to put your focus at a medium level of attention, generally just trying to put your focus on what you're watching is fine. There's no need to be very systematic about doing so like you would at a high level of attention. Simply have the intent to try to hear all the sounds that are being said, and of course, to try to understand what's being said as well. Remember, your goal when doing listening immersion is not to understand the entirety of a program, but simply to, over time, increase the number of chunks of language that you understand in whatever program it is that you are watching. Just having that goal will eventually lead you to be able to understand and follow the story of whatever you are watching. It's kind of an intangible process to learn to hear and parse your target language. So I would say simply focus on having the right intent, because if you do so, I guarantee you your listening abilities will consistently improve over time. Also, along with this, as long as you're spending some time at a high level of attention, you will notice that your base level skill of focusing on your immersion will start to improve, and it should become easier and easier to focus over time. So let's take a brief look at how I would immerse at a medium level of attention. Okay guys, so at a medium level of attention, I really wouldn't want to be on recall mode, so I go ahead and change it back to default. Default will just play through normally. But I'm also going to press, let's let it get started and then I'll show you. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to press the W key and hide the subtitles, and I'm only going to pull them up when I feel like I picked out a word or something that I want to look up or look into.
Weißt du, was wir hier sollen? So, guten Morgen, Kollegen. Jetzt, wo alle da sind, können wir anfangen. Die meisten kennen mich bereits. Ich bin gut drüber und...
What did he say? Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, let's just go ahead and look that up. What is that? Oh, can. Okay. Yeah, I used to know like this level of German, but I forget, guys.
So, guten Morgen, Kollegen. Jetzt, wo alle da sind, können wir anfangen. Die meisten kennen mich bereits. Ich bin Kurt Grimmer und leite diese Sondereinheit. Wir können uns alle sehr...
I want to listen to that
Die meisten
again.
kennen mich bereits. Ich bin Kurt Grimmer und leite diese Sondereinheit.
Sondenreinheit. Okay, what the heck is that? Oh, special. Okay. Cool. Special forces or something, right? Okay, and another thing to note here, guys, I'm not trying to really I'm not at this stage where I'm going to be making cards for my immersion. That's something that I'm going to talk about in the 4th video in this series. You know, in that video I will use like the example of Chinese or Japanese or Portuguese, a language that I know a lot more, and I can actually show you how I would go about picking out one target sentences or which sentences I would like to pick out when, you know, studying, for example. So I'll go into that.
Wir können uns alle sehr glücklich schätzen, dabei zu sein. Das ist ein richtig großer Fall. Hans, schnelle Runde.
Ich bin der Hans Kuscher, 39 Jahre. Erspar uns deine Hobbys, Hans, das ist keine Kontaktbörse. Ich bin halt der Kollege von Kurt. Erspar uns deine Hobbys, Hans, das ist keine Kontaktbörse.
What is that? Kontaktbörse or something? Let's check that out. What does that mean? Oh, I have no idea. Okay. Okay, whatever. Who cares?
Ich bin halt der Kollege von Kurt. Wir waren schon gemeinsam beim OK. Jetzt bin ich seit 6 Jahren beim Mord.
Mord? Is that like...
Ich bin halt der Kollege von Kurt. Wir waren schon gemeinsam beim OK. Jetzt bin ich seit 6 Jahren.
By Mord? Is that like death? Like... Yeah, oh, I see. Yeah, it sounded like it might be something like that.
Beim Mord.
Well, I actually just saw this, but I'm supposed to be listening, but that must be computer specialist, obviously, just by the look of it. Let's listen to him say it.
Computerspezialist.
Computer specialist or something, okay.
Ich habe keine Ahnung, warum ich hier bin aber sehr gespannt.
Ich habe auch keine Ahnung, warum ich hier bin. Banden und Delikte am Menschen, Schwerpunkt Hooligans und alles, was so mit Fußball zu tun hat. Ich bin Bruno.
Okay, guys, well, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. So, basically, at this level of attention, I'm not really listening as hard. I'm just much more relaxed about the activity and just try not to be as strict on myself with my level of focus into what is being said and just approaching it a bit more, you know, in a bit more relaxed fashion. So what about when I'm not really very engaged? Either I'm already tired or I simply just don't feel like immersing. What do I do then? Well, then I would ask very little of myself and I would immerse at a low level of attention. Considering I don't really know much German yet and I'm not really past the learn the basic structure of the language part of the process, this might be when I restart the episode and put the English subtitles on for a bit. I might watch the first 5 minutes with the English subtitles turned on and then try to rewatch it again with the German subtitles turned on instead. This might seem like a contradiction with what I said earlier when I said that this type of activity is closer to reading than it is to listening, but really it isn't, because when I'm tired and my level of attention is already low, then all of that goes out the window. My only goal at that point should be to seek to do anything I need to do in order to just complete my daily immersion goal. And hopefully, after resting some time at a lower level of attention, I can even scale my level of attention back up. But even if you can't, that's fine. Simply stay the course and meet your daily goal. There's always tomorrow, and perhaps tomorrow you'll be able to spend more time at higher levels of attention. Ideally, the overall goal is to be able to spend more and more time at higher levels of attention. But that isn't to say that you should eventually expect to spend all of your immersion time at the highest levels of attention. The goal is simply to continue to improve and find something that's sustainable for you. And especially if this is your first foreign language or you're just starting out, you're not very practiced at these sorts of behaviors yet, so there's no need to ask so much of yourself at first. You wouldn't ask a piano beginner to play Beethoven or Bach. So why should we ask ourselves to be able to be 100% focused on an immersion session from day one? It's ridiculous and unnecessary. Through repeated practice, your base level skill will rise and you'll be able to be more focused over time. It must be recognized that what we're doing when we immerse is building the skill of immersing itself. I believe changing your perspective on this point can and likely will be very beneficial if you've been having trouble thus far. The reality is there are some days where you don't even want to show up at all. So showing up on those days is already a huge win. So recognize that and give yourself a pat on the back, because the name of the game is to feel you're doing a good job, because that's motivating. Lastly, I just want to reiterate that it's possible to change the level of attention many times during a single immersion session. So if you feel a sudden resurgence of energy, feel free to try and turn the intensity back up for a bit. You can always notch it back down if you need to. I also want to touch on having access to subtitles that don't exactly match what is being said. This can often happen if you're watching a dubbed version of an American show, for example. The subtitles will not be closed captions, which are one-to-one representations of what is being said. Instead, there will be translated versions of the English closed captions, which will not exactly match what is being said in the target language dub. When someone is very new in a language, it can be very difficult to leverage these sorts of subtitles. And I would recommend that instead you watch another program where target language closed captions are available if possible. But once one has already developed a basic understanding of their target language, I still find having access to those subtitles extremely helpful. And one recommendation I would make is, when possible, to download a copy of those subtitles and read over them using a dictionary as needed, skimming over the parts that are still too difficult to understand. You would do this just one time before watching the dubbed version of the program with the subtitles then turned off. You'll be amazed at how much you will understand after having read through those subtitles once, even though they aren't a complete match. If you're studying a language where target language subtitles aren't often available, but these types of subtitles are, then I would recommend that you try leveraging them, because personally I found this technique very useful in my studies, particularly when there was a movie or show that I really wanted to watch the target language dub on. Currently, these types of extensions aren't available on every platform or every website, so at times we might find ourselves without access to these tools. In those circumstances, I recommend taking a much more relaxed approach in general. The reason for this is simple. Without those tools to facilitate your inquiries into the language, the whole process becomes much more stressful. For example, I cannot simply press a hotkey to navigate between subtitles. Instead, I must manually do it. In fact, the built-in skip ahead and jump back buttons on many sites do so at 15-second intervals, which is not very useful for us language learners who are often simply seeking to listen to the previous sentence one more time. These sorts of technical limitations greatly add to the stress of the listening process, and we must recognize this and shift our goals and focus accordingly. The most important thing is to engage with native media in as enjoyable and repeatable of a way as possible. Anyways, let's take a quick look at how I would engage with the same show if I didn't have those tools available. Okay guys, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off the Migaku toolbar and reload the page so that it's off. And then let's go ahead and take a quick look.
Hola, ik ben 40.
Zo doch Segelbörse.
Darf ich?
Lars, Forensiker.
And I'm just using the same scene, guys, because I figured the less I use of the show, like the more fair use it is. I'm not sure if that's right. So that's why I keep just using the same scene, because of that. In this case, I don't have any tools. I would probably just go ahead and turn on the German subtitles actually, but I would try to not look at them. So I'm not going to look at them unless I need them. You'll have to just believe that, but that's actually what I'm doing, so.
Ich arbeite auch schon länger mit Kurt und natürlich Hans. Also ich weiß, warum ich hier bin.
Fußballcode? Ich dachte, du stehst ja auf Boxen.
See, so this is very similar to the medium level of attention, because I'm actually going to, when I hear something, I'm going to look at the subtitle, very similarly to when I was immersing earlier using the Toolset, and I would press up to actually show the subtitle at that time. But here I'm going to go ahead and just look at it when I'm interested in looking at what I just heard, and just having also a written representation to come to mind.
Georg Landke, Sitte, 20 Jahre dabei.
Kurt?
Was? Ja, ihr fragt euch jetzt sicher, warum ich hier die Elite versammelt habe, ne? Da hinten sitzen die beiden Kollegen Petrovic und Wachtmann.
Yeah, I kind of heard it. I want to hear. See, I want to hear that one more time, but I can't really go back, which is kind of inconvenient. But I wonder if that means like something like colleague or something.
Kurt?
I'm not sure. Maybe it doesn't, but.
Ja, ihr fragt euch jetzt sicher, warum ich hier die Elite versammelt habe, ne? Da hinten sitzen die beiden Kollegen Petrovic und Wachtmann, unsere Kontaktbereichsbeamten in Marzahn. Wir haben gestern Nacht die Leiche von Orkan Erdem gefunden.
Okay, guys. Well, yeah, that's pretty much it. I would just, personally, what I would do, and what I do is I just listen and then reference subtitles if there's a word that kind of stuck out to me. Later, when I do the card creation video, I'm also going to show more of the immersion process and the card creation process at that time. So you will also be able to see how I approach a language that I understand a lot better.
The
Depending on the language you're learning, it can be very difficult to find any type of subtitles for its content. This is actually the position I found myself in 2009 when I was learning Japanese. The vast majority of content that I consumed had no subtitles or written component associated. I immersed by simply watching a show with the intent to understand it. Watching a show without subtitles at different levels of attention is a bit more difficult to express than if that show had a written component, because the activities that you do aren't quite as outwardly distinct, but do include some substantially different behaviors. When immersing with a high level of attention with this type of content, the main idea is to keep your focus on what is currently being said. As I mentioned, do your best to not fall behind, even if that means giving up on understanding some things that were just said. Remember, your goal is to understand what is being said as it's being said. So remember to focus on practicing that skill, and not the skill of recalling what was just said and trying to understand it after the fact. I actually have a great deal of experience immersing at high levels of attention with unsubtitled content. And I would say that when your understanding and your language parsing ability is high enough that you can clearly hear the words that you don't understand, that it would be fine to look some of those up. But be wary of trying to look up everything, because doing too much of the act of pausing, then typing out the word you just heard to search it, is a surefire way to deplete your willpower reserves. Listening to audio or watching a show without a written component at a medium level of attention is outwardly very similar to doing it at a high level of attention. The difference is what is happening internally. You don't need to be so strict about bringing your focus of attention back to what is currently being said. Also, when it comes to lookups, you would also scale back how many of those you do as well. Another difference might be how often you're willing to go back to listen to something that was just said. For example, going back to listen to the pitch or pronunciation of a sentence. Other than that, the activities would mostly resemble one another. At a low level of attention, you shouldn't even try to pay attention to how much you're actually understanding, but more just focus on staying with the activity and paying attention where you can. At this level of attention, just think of yourself as practicing to see how much you can understand when you're not even trying. I remember doing this many times, and it can be extremely encouraging to see how much you understand when you're not even giving your all. With a low level of attention, the whole idea is just to find a state of mind where you can stay with the activity and hopefully find it enjoyable. Even if that means sometimes largely zoning out, letting the language just flow through you. If you're still having trouble completing your daily immersion goals, then you could even try switching over to passive immersion for a while, which in this case would be similar to time boxing. Time boxing is basically doing something that you really enjoy doing for a moment and then going back and doing a task that you find more tiring, for example. But time boxing is something that I'm actually going to talk about in part 2 of this series. So if you're interested in that, be sure to check out that video next week. If you find yourself studying a language that has a severe lack of content with an exact written component, then in my opinion, the best strategy is to focus on reading content that is highly related to what you will be doing your listening immersion with. For example, if you plan on watching fantasy films, then you should be reading some fantasy short stories or novels. If you'll be watching a lot of domestic news, then read about the current events happening in your target country. In my opinion, it is far more important that your reading content closely match your listening content in a circumstance where you don't have constant access to exact subtitles. And actually, this is the exact strategy that I followed when learning both Japanese and Portuguese. Well guys, that's it for part 1 of the 4-part series. If you're interested in helping us decide the direction of Migaku, joining the official Migaku Discord community, or want access to early release versions of Migaku software projects, including the Immerse with Migaku browser extension, then please consider supporting Migaku on Patreon. Currently, we're in the process of adding a lot of new features to the Immerse with Migaku browser extension, including support for more streaming sites, adding multiple subtitle track support, learning status support for more languages, and improved Japanese parsing. When I reach 500 patrons, I plan on starting to learn a new language or heavily focusing on improving my Japanese. At that time, I plan to live stream a lot of my immersion and study to my higher tier patrons. The idea being that those patrons and I will be able to do some of our immersion and study together. And hopefully I'll be able to provide some guidance to them if they need it. So if you've been struggling and would like some more direct guidance, please consider checking that out when it starts. And as always, thank you so much to all my patrons. I couldn't do it without your support. And a special shout out to the $1 Leech tier. You guys are a big part of the reason I get up in the morning. Thanks, Leeches. If you need help with an issue or would like to join the official Immerse with Migaku subreddit, you can find those links in the description below. If you would like a chance to win free special VIP access to the official Migaku Discord community and Migaku software projects, then please subscribe to the channel and leave a like and comment on this video. At the end of every month, I choose 10 people to get a free behind the scenes look at the community we're building, and that number will be increasing in the future as new Patreon milestones are reached. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you found some value in today's video. See ya!